My mother likes to tell people that I went crazy at age 12, and that's because I started doing drugs and hanging out on the street with the older boys. But far from having a mental health problem, my acting out behaviors were symptoms that something had gone very wrong in my childhood. The population of Canada is 35 million people. In any given year, 1 in 5 or 7 million people suffer from some sort of mental health distress, with a total cost to the economy in excess of $50 billion. If these statistics are accurate, it means that up to 40 people in this room right now are dealing with some sort of mental health stress. At the age of 22, I became a statistic. When my psychologist became so frightened by my suicidal tendencies that she sent me to a psychiatrist. Now, within 30 minutes of meeting me, the psychiatrist diagnosed me manic depressive, and he gave me a prescription for lithium and told me I would be on the drug for the rest of my life. Well, I'd already been doing street drugs for 10 years at this point, and I thought that adding another drug into the mix probably wasn't the best idea in the world. I figured that the symptoms that had gotten me diagnosed had a very real history to them, and that exploring these symptoms was crucial to understanding my diagnosis. As children, we're not equipped to deal with stresses like emotional neglect and sexual abuse, and yet we still find coping mechanisms. But these coping mechanisms come at a price, because practiced over a lifetime, they become our personality traits. Many people who are diagnosed mentally ill in our culture are actually suffering from unresolved emotional stress, whether it's from childhood abuse, traumatic life events, or both. Now, what is a symptom of emotional distress? Well, I'll give you one from my history. As a child, I rocked all the time. I rocked while I was standing up, I rocked myself to sleep every night, and I rocked at my desk for 12 years of grade school. I had teachers ask me if I was autistic, and I had the other kids tease me for acting strangely. Nobody knew, because no one connected the dots, that rocking is a symptom of an emotionally distressed person. After my diagnosis, I spent the next 15 years moving in and out of major depressive episodes, most of these suicidal. Depression slowed my life down, and it forced me to feel the very emotions that I had been running away from. In time, I came to see that I was paralyzed by the pain of my own past, and that I didn't want to end my life. What I really wanted was to break free from this pain. In this sense, depression was my teacher. It was my personally tailored version of the dark night of the soul. And this notion that what we term mental illness in our culture is actually a manifestation of the psyche's need to reintegrate parts of itself has had the support of great thinkers throughout the ages. People like William James, Wilhelm Reich, right through to contemporary teachers like Carolyn Mace and Dr. Gabor Mate. Depression was key to me reconnecting with myself, because the only way beyond my pain was through it. So you might be wondering, how does depression manifest in someone's life? And how does childhood trauma show up in somebody's everyday affairs? Well, for me, it manifested in me never trusting anybody. It manifested in me having so little faith in people and society that I lived in my truck on remote mountain roads for 6 years. It saw me fly into a rage whenever I felt my boundaries had been transgressed. One time it saw me boot in the panels of my dad's car with my steel-toe boots, and another time I woke up covered in blood and didn't know what had happened. It manifested in me constantly medicating myself with street drugs and alcohol for the pain that I was in, and when this pain crept in despite my best efforts, it saw me trying to figure out ways to end my life. Somewhere in my late 20s, I realized that the substances were masking the very emotions that I needed greater access to, and they therefore had to go. But as we all know, giving up addictions is not that easy. You know that feeling when you know you really shouldn't do something, but you do it anyway? You reach for that last donut, you buy that 100th pair of shoes, or you light up that crack pipe? Well, then you also know how easy it is to ignore that feeling, which is what I always did. Until I got thrown in jail for drug dealing. Imagine right now getting plucked out of your everyday reality and thrown into a jail cell. Instantly, your life gets brought down to 4 concrete walls, a tiny cot, and a toilet. Anyone who's been there will tell you it's one of the best places to get some thinking done because there's no more distractions and there's certainly no more drugs. To my surprise, I missed neither. Instead, my mind kept wandering back to the day that I had been introduced to the activity that would forever alter the course of my life. 1 month before I got thrown in jail, I was introduced to the world of ice climbing. On that day, I felt joy for the first time in my life without the use of a heavy dose of street drugs. Up until then, I'd been filling my emptiness with substances, and on that day I realized that instead of just numbing myself, I could actually fill my life with things that brought me joy, and in this way trade in addiction for passion. If you asked me what happiness felt like on that first day, I would say that I felt light, I felt buoyant, without a care in the world, and it was the first time ever that I didn't feel the emotional burden that I always carried around with me. Over the next 10 years, I used the crucible of climbing to move from the depths of darkness and into the light. Now, climbing is a metaphor for life. I'm going to take you on a climb right now and show you the 3 most important things that helped me move out of addiction and depression. Number 1, water droplets drip down, and they tend to form reliable masses of ice. But sometimes they drip down and they freeze in these fragile columns that climbers refer to as chandelier ice. When you swing your axe into it, it's hard to get a solid placement. Well, navigating life with the effects of childhood trauma is a lot like navigating chandelier ice. You never feel like you have a solid foundation beneath you. What we need in these circumstances is we need to allow ourselves and find ways to develop in ways that we never could have as a child, and thus giving ourselves this solid foundation. Number 2, ice climbers equip ourselves with all the right tools. I've mentioned the axes that we swing into the ice. We've got crampons on our feet, harnesses at our waist, and helmets to protect our head. We bring ice screws, and we place these into the ice at various intervals so that if we take a fall, we can only fall as far as the rope coming tight in the last piece of protection. We can't fall all the way to the ground, which is something climbers refer to as a ground fall. Now, a ground fall is the equivalent of hitting rock bottom. And rock bottom is a great turnaround point for some people, and for others, it's the beginning of a slippery slide into oblivion. We need to have the protection of a support system in place so that we don't keep taking more and more successive ground falls. Number 3, ice climbing is a moving meditation and an exercise in mindfulness. Depression has been defined as being caught in the pain of the past, and anxiety, the fear of future events. The obvious antidote to both of these is the present moment. But the present moment is a difficult place to live, and especially because of the distractions in our society, but especially when you have unresolved trauma living inside your body. Instead of fearing these uncomfortable emotions and running away and numbing ourselves, we need to go more deeply into them and be present with them. Climbing taught me to trust myself and to trust life. With the right tools and techniques, you find you can move yourself upward 1 step at a time. You can't see the whole route, you don't know exactly what it's going to throw at you, but you trust that when the time comes, you'll be able to navigate it, and you will arrive at your desired goal. Unless you don't. The naked truth about addiction and depression is that a lot of people don't make it through to the other side. The institutions we have set up in our society are continuously treating the symptoms of emotional distress and not the causes, and therefore they're ineffective. The traumatized segments of society fill our prison wards and our mental institutions, our safe injection sites, and our rehab centers. And until we figure out ways to reintegrate the traumatized into society, things will not get any better. In fact, they'll get a lot worse. At the age of 37, I topped out on my climb out of depression. To this day, it is the single greatest accomplishment of my lifetime. I wouldn't will suicidal depression on my worst enemy, but what I will say is that looking back over the experiences that are labeled a disease and a disorder in our society, all I see is the architectural beauty to the blueprint for my own healing. Everything that I went through helped me piece together my psyche, which had been shattered before the age of reason. I have learned that we all have within us everything we need to heal from emotional trauma. If we can stop the distraction, become present, and listen to the wisdom inside ourselves. In this way, we become inner guides on our own healing journeys, a journey that takes us beyond symptoms, beyond labels, and beyond mental illness. Because the real question here is not, are we mentally ill, but rather, what is the next step we need to take on our healing journeys? Thank you.